Most of you can't know me. If you don't know me, I'm Annabelle Sholomino, so I'm a sexual reproductive health doctor, usually based in Leicester, who decided to start new conversations in sexual and reproductive health using the umbrella of Decolonising Contraception to connect with other sex educators and health professionals working in sexual and reproductive health, because I thought that the narratives within sexual and reproductive health were quite narrow. We weren't discussing the influences of particularly colonial history, but also culture and other aspects that I feel impact sexual and reproductive health disparities. What we have been gathered today for is the LGBTQI plus visibility and access event, where we'll discuss a lot of things regarding accessing sexual and reproductive health services, but also just the experience more in general. I'm going to try and keep my chitter-chatter to a minimum and let the panellists speak apart from moving the conversation along. Before I start, I usually try to give an overview of why we've decided to do this specific event. Some of you might have read it, but I did do a blog piece on GELM about colonialism and its influence on LGBTQI plus identities, particularly how it's changed the landscape of sexual and reproductive health, and how much of our history we know. So in terms of a lot of the colonial laws that exist in colonised countries, in Africa, Asia, the Americas and things like that, are derived from being colonised. Britain was probably the worst offender in terms of its rigidity, and a lot of these are connected to Christianity, but then a lot of them were connected with control, and some of these laws are still in existence today. It's come up at a previous panel, but in terms of the Hijra population in South Asia, and how that population had a certain amount of prestige. For people that don't know, that's the equivalent of the trans population, although it goes by different names in different languages, and typically had quite a prominent position, and then today that identity has been kind of stripped back. Quite a marginalised group have quite high rates of HIV and STIs, and often forced into sex work rather than like a voluntary thing that they're doing just because of lack of options. So that's just one example, but there are lots of examples that I'm sure the other panellists will know about, and that's just one thing. Not everything that we speak about is going to fit into a nice, neat decolonial framework, but it's the starting place for these discussions, because I think it's helped me to think more broadly. But we will step out of that. The agenda's on the back of the sheet, and we will try and follow that format, but then sometimes we segue off into other things, and we'll leave time for the Q&A at the end. Just a point before we kickstart, I very naughtily left Sophie Duker, the amazing comedian,
so embarrassing.
And she will also introduce herself and be taking part in the discussion. So, going from Dr. Ronk this time, I'll let everybody introduce themselves, because I think that way you get the best flavour, and then we'll go into the discussion.
Thank you, Annabelle. Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Ronks. I'm an emergency medicine registrar at Homerton Hospital. I go by the pronouns she and her, sometimes they and them, depends what mood I'm in. I describe myself as a British-born, black, Nigerian, intersectional feminist who's androgynous. I also work as a TV presenter on Kids TV. My kind of motto is you cannot be what you do not see. I'm really passionate about young people. I feel that my kind of role on this earth is to amplify the voices of like black and majority ethnic and vulnerable marginalised group, and hopefully bring that to the TV. How do I know you? I know you from medical school. We went to medical school together, and I finished work at 3 o'clock this morning, so I'm really knackered. Over to you.
That's why you said medical school. We absolutely didn't go to medical school together.
Oh, did we not?
Hey!
Hey!
You went to my rival. You went to King's.
What?
I went to UCL.
How do we know each other?
We just
Wow.
found each other.
Wow. Swiftly moving on. I thought we went to medical school together.
So, we went to medical school.
We are twins.
Hello everyone, my name is Sakib. That was really good. I'm just going to talk and maybe it will be coherent. I primarily am a youth worker. I work and have worked in different programs, mostly with an organisation with a terrible name. I'm not going to say it because it's trash. But we work with young men in schools and we spend a few hours with groups of young men talking about masculinity and gender stereotypes, and they're like 15, so the conversations are only so elevated, but we get to have a conversation around pressures that they feel as young men and trying to shape what they might become when they're older. I also run anti-racist trainings with groups of activists and arts institutions, because they're always surprised when I say your labels are probably a little bit racist because you didn't just acquire that thing, did you? So that's a fun job. I'm looking at this because I'm forgetting everything. I'm actually going to stop, that's it. I'm good.
Hello everyone, I'm Phil Samba. I'm currently a health improvement specialist at Terence Higgins Trust, working mostly to reduce and prevent HIV amongst men of colour. I'm also a social activist and a writer. I'm a PrEP advocate and a PrEP user. And a lot of my work kind of focuses around queer men of colour and I guess honest visibility and representation of men of colour.
Hello everyone, my name is Sophie. I am not on your handouts because of bisexual erasure.
I have no words.
Oh, I'm so ashamed.
It's alright, my pronouns are she, her and that bitch. I promise not to make jokes for the whole way through. I'm a comedian, so I feel very unqualified to be here. I also work in television as a producer and writer, and I guess that I interact with a lot of these issues on a more like lay person basis. I run a night called Wacky Racist, which platforms artists of colour, comedians of colour, and I've done various fundraising around things related to this sector, but I'll probably talk about that when we get into it. Thank you.
I'm Josina Callist. I am the strategic lead for Women and PrEP at Prepster, which is an organisation which educates and agitates for better PrEP access as part of HIV prevention tools. That includes work with trans women, which I guess will be the end bit of my work that's relevant to this discussion, but Phil can chip in the other bits as well. Not now.
Okay.
And aside from that, I am queer. I'm also bi, so we're not entirely stuck in this corner here.
The ghetto. Sorry.
And I guess I don't really have a prepared spiel, but I think one thing that would be really important to start by saying is that as a Caribbean person, people assume that your coming out story will have been awful. And I just want to start by saying it's not always the case. I've had a great time with my family and friends and my workplace. Laura, there. But you can have a workplace that's supportive and a family that's supportive and friends that are just really excited, and that can be for Black people and other people of colour as well.
Absolutely.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
I feel like we should just stop now. But just to, and I also said in my introduction, that the panels generally, we do try to have a mixture of health and activists and campaigners and lay people, so we can get a lovely multifaceted discussion, and that is what Duca is bringing to the table, Sophie.
The facts.
So no pressure, no pressure. Okay, so just firstly, quite broad and happy for anybody that has any burning thoughts to start. Obviously, in the introduction, I mentioned kind of colonial history and the history just generally about the LGBTQI community, and I was just wondering how much people feel that they had to go out and seek out that history, how much they know now, and how that kind of influences their interactions and maybe their confidence in general, and how that feeds into, I guess, their wider health, if at all. Big question. But any thoughts to kick us off?
Well, you did your homework, so.
I did not.
Oh.
Oh, wow. I just got outed. That's not my homework.
You outed yourself,
There's no homework. As long as you do, it's fine.
Shit, am I going?
Anyone? No?
Phil, you want to, don't you?
Well, the question is kind of how are, I guess, queer groups kind of aware of their colonial history. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of not realizing that homosexuality has kind of always been deemed normal before I can never say it. Can someone else say it for me?
Colonisation.
There we go. And like in my sort of line of work, with conversations outside of sexual health and mental health, a lot of the conversations are always around coming out. How can I come out to my family and but they don't realize that all of that pressure and all of that kind of mess around it is sort of societal and not something that is natural, I guess. So yeah, that's my two.
I would add to that also that as in my job as an A&E doctor, I mostly spend most of my time with young kids in the paediatric department, and there have been many occasions where just by my aesthetic and kids seeing me on TV and me wearing my like rainbow coloured everything, that I'm often approached by kids in the paediatric department to ask them to facilitate conversations with their parents in regards to coming out. And I've had the privilege, and I call it a privilege because I think it's magical to be part of somebody's kind of evolution. Anyhow, usually these peeps, young people are Nigerian or mostly Nigerian, but usually from an African or Caribbean background. And the sad thing, as you said, that I often find is people often say, and parents often say, but you're a doctor, how can you be gay? You're Nigerian. How can you be gay? There's no gay in Nigeria. And to hear that is so exhausting, because we know that there are gay people flourishing in like Victoria Island in Nigeria, so people need to be quiet. But I think elder folk, where there is a very strong religious kind of foundation in terms of their life, I don't know if it's a naivety towards colonial history or whether actually the power of God is so much that it doesn't matter the history. But I think religion is, I don't want to say the biggest problem, because religion helps folk too, but I think it's the biggest challenge we have when it comes to actually decolonising people's opinions about our existence.
That was, I think, very well put. I think in the piece that I wrote, just in terms
I've read it, it's beautiful.
But in terms of religion and the influence, I think, and you all might have different opinions on this, that religion definitely is becoming, especially in West Africa, and I think in the Americas as well, and you're seeing in Brazil, it is making it harder for this community, because you've got this rise in kind of like evangelical religion, and people have been taught that, you know, these things are not of us, and even when you present people with quite clear evidence to the contrary, and I think there are books like Call Me a Woman, which if none of you have read it, is I think the subtitle is Queer Stories of Women in Nigeria. Haven't finished it, I've read some of them, and I was so grateful when that book came out, because it's like, here is just categorical evidence. People can't keep saying that community just doesn't exist. So yes.
Yeah, I remember recently, I think in the last year or so, seeing a sort of photo series that was about queer Africans, and it was, I think there was like little bits of autobiography, like as in people who live in the continent. And I remember just being sort of transfixed by it, like in the thing of like, this is evidence, this is real, and looking at them and wondering what their lives were, and that sort of visibility, even for me as someone of the diaspora who doesn't necessarily think I could fit into that, it sort of traces a sort of lineage and a precedent that you can apply to your own life. I think with the impacts of colonial history and the influence of religion on that, within colonialism, religion was used as a tool to control people.
Exactly.
So religion obviously can be so much more than that, but the way that things are edited out of your understanding when it's like you're seeing things through a colonial prism means that you don't know about queer Africans, you don't know your own history, you don't see any context for it. And just as a person, like personally in my family, I believed when I was a child that queerness didn't exist in Africa, even though I lived for 2 years in Africa when I was like very young. And like now, like more and more things are coming out. Like my uncle wrote a book in which there were queer characters, and I didn't think people even knew about this. I didn't think they would speak, and it's still unspoken. People don't speak about it. One of my cousins has come out as a lesbian, and it's not really talked about. But you know that this existed, and it's not just something that's erupting in life. It's something that's always been there.
Lots of elders have problems with labels as well. Sometimes when you're existing quietly, and I think controversial, but nevertheless, sometimes when people existing quietly, you're like, oh yeah, that auntie lives with that auntie. They've been together for years, and that's that. I think for me, I've learned that that is actually also a form of acceptance, because we talk about coming out, and I've not come out to my parents because I left home when I was really, really young. But in terms of coming out to people around me, my very existence and the fact that folk interact with me and elder folk interact with me, for me, is a kind of coming out process. Because I think for some of us, the whole sitting down with the family and going, let's have tea, balloons, everybody's come round, it's great, we're all wearing rainbow colours. It feels like it's a Western mould which a lot of us don't fit in. So when you say that actually there are uncles and aunties that have written books and living together, and it's always been there. It just never had those labels which sometimes can out people and cause negativity. So I'm in like two minds. Do I like let people live and just, that's that, or do we need to stand up and be counted and say, accept me, this is my label, this is who I am? That's a bit of a segue from what you said. But
No.
Yeah.
It's also about what can be celebrated, and whether it's going to help your survival or not, or help mental health or not. And I came out to an aunt last Christmas, and I did it in such a way that was really relaxing for me, because I hadn't really built up to that moment. And then the way that she responded was like it wasn't a big deal, and she's really religious. But I think building a relationship with her first, rather than being like, are you going to accept me or not, meant that it wasn't the primary source of our bond, and she could see this is who I am as a range of things, rather than just my sexuality, which how many people want to talk to their family about their sexuality anyway? There shouldn't be an extra pressure on people who are queer to do that when you wouldn't normally do that. And then another question which I want everyone to think about is all the different ways in which society regulates sex. So when I was studying sexual health, they made us think about ways that sex is regulated so that to try and make us all monogamous, or to only have procreative sex, so that would be trying to prevent access to contraception, abortion, and then the third aspect of that would be try and regulate so it's heterosexual. So those same laws will affect all of us, but it may be that we're only talking about, especially now, LGBTQ sex, but that we would all benefit from the emancipation or liberation from certain structures, and they might be more noticeable here. And then I think one of the most damaging things can be when someone like Peter Tatchell nominates themselves to be spokespeople for black and brown queer people worldwide, because he's not doing it in our interests. and having that fed back to you without any kind of understanding or, you know, of nuances, and, you know, just hearing, oh, Jamaica's the most dangerous place to be gay, and it isn't great for lots of people that are there, but then, you know, like, class mediates it so much, so that in the Caribbean you've got lots of different experiences based on, you know, levels of protection afforded to people, or, you know, whether they're on the streets already. And yeah, like, I've seen a lot of, I guess, Western people, white queer people, who are feeding back our problems to us without thinking about the colonial history, without caring, or, you know, people who are incredibly atheist saying, well, in this country they'll kill you if you're gay, and yeah, that might be true, but it also might not be, and, you know, are you actually helping the situation by drawing attention to that? So I think the more we ignore people like Peter Tatchell, and have the conversation on our own terms, you know, I want to talk to other queer Caribbean descent people, and other queer black people about what it's actually like, and, you know, hear from people who have gone home for a period of time, and, you know, what was their experiences like, who could they talk to, you know, how did they navigate an identity in somewhere that has a very different series of, you know, laws or rules around sex. And
just for people that might be listening back, or even in the audience that don't know, do you want to explain briefly who Peter Tatchell is?
do I have to?
I know
He is a seasoned activist from Australia, I believe, who's been in Britain for quite a while, and I think did a citizen's arrest of Robert Mugabe, and was told by Ugandan queer activists to stop doing what he was doing. I think, yeah, he's quite open to being quite agitative of various people, but yeah, he rubs people up the wrong way, including lots of queer activists worldwide.
I think you touched upon so many reasons for why we actually, or I decided to start this and reach out to other sex educators in terms of decolonising contraception. Just a few points thinking back to this panel in particular. So the reason that we actually went with decolonising contraception is because I think there's this huge misunderstanding that contraception is only the concern of cis women, when actually it is the concern of everybody, because it's about controlling people's bodies and ability to reproduce, and if you can control somebody's ability to reproduce, you can control whole populations. And at the moment that is very, very striking in how people are trying to exert power over the trans community and force sterilisation process, but it's still something that is very relevant to everybody regardless of gender and sexuality. So I think it was also about raising awareness of that point, that it should be the concern of everybody, and we're not just supposed to think it's the concern of this really narrow group of people. And then it was also about the dominance of people feeling that people are advocating on their behalf, and that, I guess, the LGBTQI community and people of colour and other marginalised groups, these, I guess, risky populations.
That's already another language and term, which is
that people can't access, and breaking down that actually we are accessible, and we also, in some respects, are perfectly able to help ourselves if given the right resources. So yeah. Just wanted to know, in terms of kind of history and where we've come to now, does anybody in the panel know of Bobrisky in Nigeria? Yeah.
No.
So some people in the audience know. So essentially, Bobrisky is kind of what would you say? It's supposed she is supposed to be an entertainer. I'm not actually sure of her pronouns, but essentially is a trans woman that has seemingly been accepted by mainstream Nigerian society and in some Nollywood films, and went through a transition process, which, you know, I think by our standards would be a transition process, and it's actually one of the most famous entertainers in Nigeria, and I think it's very, very interesting given how transphobic as a community Nigeria technically is, especially because Jonathan Goodluck, I'm not sure if people know, a few years ago introduced all these anti-homophobia laws and people being thrown into jail. But I think it's quite interesting.
Anti-homosexuality laws.
Pardon?
No, anti-homophobia.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, and I think, as Ronks was saying, it's interesting how people accept in this kind of weird, nuanced way, because Bobrisky is out there living her life, making lots of money as one of the lead entertainers in probably one of the most homophobic, religious countries that there is in West Africa. So I don't know if people have other examples of that.
Panto. I mean, Britain's not that, trans inclusive, but, we've had panto and acceptance and celebration. Like, I think queer people as entertainment is seen as fine, but queer people as, needing protections or deserving of the same rights, that's when you encounter problems.
Well, I'm looking at Bobrisky here. I don't think everyone can see. Bobrisky passes, and the thing is if you pass, everyone loves you. If you don't pass or you're androgynous, people question.
But the thing is that Bobrisky has had a lot of backlash online
Sure.
and in person, and a lot of people have found them and bullied them and filmed it and stuff like that. So they're not 100% accepted. So they are accepted in a completely different way to what's ever been done before. But I wouldn't say they're entirely accepted by their...
I mean, entire acceptance is like looking for the unicorn at the end of the rainbow. Do you know what I mean? But
this is revolutionary.
It's yeah.
But I do think Josina raises a really valid point, and as do you, in terms of, first of all, I think there is a long history of people that are gender variant being used as entertainment and that being an acceptable thing. But then when you want to
live your life or go to Tesco's,
do
you know what I mean? Are you a boy? Are you a girl?
Then it becomes much
That's
much
my life.
more difficult.
Yeah.
And then there's the argument, which not the argument, the issue, which I guess was can't feed into the next point of discussion about passing and what that means in terms of accessing care, because there will be a plethora of experience on the panel, and it is very different depending on if you pass or not, because then you can choose not to declare things, or you have to declare things, or people might guess, and that brings up all manner of things. So just some final points around this issue in history. So in your personal experiences, do you feel like acquiring knowledge, and where you acquired that knowledge might be good to share, has been useful to your individual experiences in terms of your confidence building, how you navigate not just services but just life in general?
I just want to say, and I'll lead on to what you just asked about the sort of perceived acceptance of gender variant people or queer lifestyles. I think that within our communities, and especially within elders of those communities who don't necessarily identify as that, there's a certain amount of compartmentalization. So you can watch something on television, find it very entertaining, that's for this space, you're a certain person at work, you're a certain person at home. And my mum, I remember in the past, could talk about this gay guy at her work, and she was seemed to be completely fine with this, and I didn't understand how that tallied with her understanding of homosexuality as wrong, dictated to her by her religion. I think where that becomes a problem is that if you're compartmentalizing and you're like, okay, I'm like this when I go home and see my family, I'm like this at school, I'm like this with partners, is that it becomes very unsafe for you to navigate your questions about your own health, about you can't speak to certain people about things, you can't be open about the gender of your partner, you can't ask questions to your mum about what you should be doing in the bedroom or things that have happened to you, because you can't even access services because you think that your lifestyle, people will judge you for them. And I've held back information from health professionals because I think I can't be bothered getting into that conversation, or I think that they'll judge me or make assumptions about me. I think the place where I have got information has basically been the internet, which is a terrible place to get information. It's not a good place because now there is so much, and if you don't have like specialised information, if you don't have community around you, you just see things. There's so much conflicting information as well. There's entertainment on the internet, there's pornography on the internet, and you don't know what applies to you and what you should be doing. And then more recently from other queer people, I've been able to get that knowledge, but it was still anecdotal. So I think for me, places that are safe, that are kind of official, that have the weight of authority and safety behind them are really important, and something that I don't yet feel that I have access to or knowledge of.
Contrastly, I think some of the best information and the best things that have happened to me have been in places really unlikely, maybe nightclubs. Maybe not now, but I think as we can the degeneration of queer like night spaces to go out and stuff is a whole nother subject. But in the early 2000s, I feel that there were safer places for folk to hang out. I could name like Ghetto. I could name, which, you know, I say safe. I say like there were, you would go there, you would know the people, and you'd be like, oh hi babe, and you could be your best gay self, and then you put on your jacket and you get that night bus home. And it was those places that I met like for like people that I could talk about kind of being androgynous and maybe, you know, stuff like where to buy binders, stuff like that. It's stuff that maybe you'd go on the internet, but also you didn't want people checking your cookies and stuff like that. But I mean, real talk. But so in terms of safe places, I've decided that the safe place, what is a safe place? Safe for some, safe for others. I don't know if a safe place exists. I think the safest place in my life is my bed, because that's just me and I live alone. So I think as queer people, we have to just learn to be able to source the best from wherever we can. And I know that sounds really like, why should we? But like, I'm really enjoying this space now, and I've heard some stuff, and you said it might not be safe, but I feel okay.
I think that's a really good point that you raised, just about the safe spaces, but what is a safe space, and you try and create these safe spaces, but people reveal themselves to be problematic in a multitude of ways. You think they're fine, and then they just come out with a big turd. So yeah, we do the best we can here, but you're absolutely right. Yes.
There's so much happening, and I'm
sorry.
I'm trying to work out like what to say. I actually don't know where to start. Let's go with space. No, I'm actually not going to do that.
What was the question?
Where do you get your...
So,
yes, good, helpful.
I've actually forgotten.
It was where do you get your info and knowledge?
It was about information and getting your information and knowledge, and how so far you feel that's helped you with your experiences, and maybe if that's helped you navigating like sexual health services.
And sexual health services.
But you don't need to tie it back to that.
So maybe I can stop before we get to the sexual health services bit. But like, yes, it helps, and it ties into spaces too. So I guess, okay, I feel like it's really messy to start with, and then I think about what makes up all the messiness. So I think about it as being Pakistani but not Indian, British, Asian but also Scottish, Muslim but as Muslim as you can be when you're queer. And then I'm like, that's why my brain is like this. That's why my brain is like this every day. Because I don't know where to go. But I think, so when I access spaces, like club nights, I'm like, where do I find people that look like me and also like to be? Probably the clubs. And then, but when I go to the South Asian clubs, like somehow, they were all hanging out together before and they all know the same music. And then I'm confused because I'm like, I don't know this music. I don't know the routine, but all of you somehow do.
Yes.
That's my life. All like, it's like, you know, when we think about like the show you talk about like Indian films and all these people appear from nowhere and start dancing, and I was like, you're proving that stereotype right. But also like, and it's so inaccessible to me because like I don't know if they're from Pakistan or India, and I'm like, what language do you speak? I don't want to ask because I'm not that guy. And then I'm like, okay, well I'll just stand at the side, I like do like a little two-step and just be happy that it's happening. So like, visibility is helpful, but it doesn't really do anything in here. Like a conversation. Sorry, I started.
I was just going to absolutely in terms of being. I think you saying something really powerful about being othered within your own community, which I think people fail to also discuss. That, you know, within own communities, which again, sometimes we'll say, you just don't connect. You're just, yeah.
And call-out culture, where we're very quick to tell people that they're wrong and they don't fit and they need to fix up, when we're all just, you know, trying to just make our way.
I think we've gone from correcting people to just cancel culture. Instead of educating people and saying this is why you're wrong, we're now doing this thing where as soon as someone does or says something problematic, that they're cancelled.
Yeah,
That's it.
I hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you worry about your past Instagram and your, because I wasn't like this when I was 16. When I was 16, I probably said, "Oh, you gay," even though I was gay. Do you know what I mean? But this is it. We have to be allowed to make mistakes, and I think we're the first to try and, you know, everyone has to be gold star, and we're all just human.
Yeah. Well, even here, like, we've got LGBTQIA. I don't think anyone on this panel can speak to the experiences of intersex or asexual people. We're not explicitly here to speak on those experiences. So then, if there are people in the room who do want to, you know, inform us, or we say something, you know, problematic, then we would hopefully welcome that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what the Q&A usually we get into, and people say, actually, that thing you spoke about actually happened to me, and I had a better take on it.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah, so hopefully, yeah, that can be maybe brought out. But I think you say a really powerful thing in terms of cancel culture at the moment for people that don't know. I think it's more come out of social media, so it's the idea, I guess, that if you misstep on a social media front, that's it, you're gone. But it's very odd, because sometimes we cancel people and then they're not really fully cancelled, because we cancel them for 2 days and then they're
And then there they are.
doing events, people buying their album, people attending their events. So cancel culture seems to be temporary, but I do think it has a really huge, it's very difficult, more so for people that are finding their identities. And learning about themselves, because then if you say something that didn't quite correlate with how you were, I don't know, a few months ago, people say that you're lying, and that you are, that you're a fraud. And as we know, that we don't all come into our identities sometimes until quite late. So I think, you know, for people that are navigating different parts of their identity, whether that be sexuality or other things, I think it is particularly difficult.
Yes, I feel like I'm there. Also, wow, it's gone. It's going. There's also like an element of cancel culture. Good, we're back. Virtue signaling is what I was going to get to, and so sometimes I'm all for like people having said trash stuff and then doing better. And sometimes I'm really worried that even in like spheres of social justice, people still want to climb some ladder and find ways to say the right things that feel like you're, like it's lip service, right? And they're waving the flags of like, I've learned. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not about the cancel culture, but also like maybe I'm about more, like some sort of like sincere, like accountability process or something. I don't know what that is. Somebody can suggest one if you want. But like, there's something about like, I'm also like tentative because I get it, you're doing better now, but also even though those words were a year ago, I don't trust you yet. Does that make sense?
And that's okay.
And that's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, going to transition to our next point that we've been bouncing around a lot, which is fine and good. So the second kind of point that I just wanted to get into a bit is about, we've touched on it in terms of like creating spaces for specific communities and how insofar that is actually necessary and it improves stuff. And then obviously, you know, on the other side of that, of the scale, people are like, well, you're segregating yourselves and you can't just have people that look like you treating you because, you know, then we won't get anywhere. People need to learn about you so we can all be better. So just how much you guys feel that these spaces are necessary in your line of work? Do you have good examples? And yeah.
Feel that what spaces are necessary?
So spaces that target specific communities, essentially, whether those be queer spaces or people of colour spaces, and if you've got examples within your own practice of how that actually works and is useful.
I mean, I run a project that's targeting women from communities that are affected by HIV and mobilising them to talk about sexual health and HIV prevention in their communities. And for the training, it is really important that there is a certain like for like, but it's not really meant to be a safe space apart from that there's no cis men in it, but that for going out into the communities, it wouldn't really be justifiable to say like, well, this is going to be a safe space and you know you can talk to only those kinds of people, because everyone needs to be able to talk about sexual health and everyone needs to have that exposure to the same like information. I think there's often been a lot of spaces that are designed to be safe, but then you can't control human interaction, and so the idea that people that are similar are going to have better human interactions than people who are diverse and different is not necessarily the case, and we shouldn't be afraid of conflict, I guess. So it is about managing it, and people have asked me, how can you run a project that might get one volunteer who's a Somali woman in her 40s and then a trans woman who's 20, and just assuming that they're not going to get on. And you don't know. Yes, they may have extremely different socialisation that's about sexual health, but the 20-year-old trans woman could also be Somali, and then that's a massive gap in people's awareness that you assume like, okay, you've got gay people over here and then black people over here, and that there's no sort of nothing connecting people who have like diverse like genders or sexualities and people who have like entrenched ideas about culture. So I don't really know what point I'm making in terms of like health services or like separating people, but there's a time and a place for some conversations, and then there should be an expectation that we're working towards everyone generally being in the same room together. I think we're doing that quite well right now.
I think, using myself as an example, being doctors, we're told that it's all about patient-centred care. And I think if we put in the service user in the middle and thinking, what does this person need? I think the most important thing is variety, and variety comes in kind of the face of variety are the people offering the service, the language that's used, the advertising, the leaflets, just loads of different things. So I don't see it just as humans, just as us. I want to see, for example, when we're talking about HIV care, I want to see the Somalian woman, I want to see the Asian woman, I want to see the white woman. When we're talking about, I just want to see a variety of faces, but I definitely know that when I speak to young people, they often say the difficulty they have is that if the person in front of them not necessarily looks like them, but doesn't seem to be mindful, or just, such as like saying, hello, what's your name, what are your pronouns, already you're like, this person's done some training, this person's aware that, it's just like a mental tick box where you're like, okay, I feel I can relax a little bit. Because not all the time, if the person is maybe black working in sexual health, that person, might understand what's going on. For them, it might just be a paycheck. But if we're centering the human being and the person there, I think it's not just the humans that are there, it's languages. For example, some places have leaflets in the like in the local, there might be Turkish. Lots of, what do Hasidic Jewish people speak? Hebrew, yep, sorry, there you go, wrong. But so it's also about that. But I do think we need to have space for people to be like, I'm going to this sexual health clinic and I know it's for LGBTQI plus people, because that the people that are working there at between 5 and 9 know that certain types of people are coming, and that their language, the way they behave, and the things that they need to do and offer is all going to be centered around those people. Wearing rainbow doesn't mean that you're rainbow friendly. And I've had to tell people at work, like, why are you wearing that? Oh, because, we've got given it. Do you know what it means? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think people should wear rainbow stuff if they're not prepared to be a safe human being.
They weren't ready for you.
But can I ask you, with that, like,
Yeah.
so at the moment it'd be specialist services like Clinic Q, Clinic T.
Homerton has Clifton
Homerton.
Centre, which has specific for men who sleep with men, and then there's the LGBTQI. So we do have,
Yeah.
and then it's
So
And
that's now.
just to explain, the Clinic Q and Clinic T are services that are for trans
Yeah,
community
it's-
and
yeah.
queer community, and there's one, I think in Dean Street,
Yes.
and then there's
Yeah.
another one mirroring the same service in Brighton.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They're kind of pioneering services.
Is the ultimate goal, I mean, you're both doctors, there's some more doctors in the room somewhere, but, you know, is the ultimate goal that all health professionals would be able to give the same standard of care to all queer and trans people?
Not for
So
me.
I
I think that's
think-
unrealistic.
I think that's unrealistic,
Mm.
and I think there has to be a certain level of training that people are not. It's bringing out their. I mean, people have prejudice.
Absolutely.
And we can't. I think it's unrealistic to think we're going to erase all of this prejudice that people have and bias
Ever?
and won't
Yeah.
manifest
No, we're not
in
getting-
people's body language.
Yeah.
Okay, at least bias. Okay, because people have inherent bias. I think we can do better. We can
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
so much better than we're doing now. Because the thing is, we haven't even tried. With like the vast majority of people, we were just allowed to exist in their bubbles of discrimination.
Absolutely.
So I think the aim would definitely to be improved. However, this came up at another recent discussion we had. Now the thing is that for some people that are going to have these prejudices anyway, even when you lay the facts before their table, in front of them, do you want somebody that has prejudice to be providing care to people that they don't feel are equal to them, because that person won't get a good standard of care? And sometimes it manifests, which I was going to get on to asking about, it manifests sometimes in violence, even if that's like subtle violence. People have anonymously written to me, and I thank people for sharing their experiences after things like panels, saying that once they declared to, a nurse or a doctor that they were queer, they felt that consultation process and their examination was done with more force than necessary. And I think that's something that we also have to interrogate. They might have had a vaginal examination or a speculum, which is when you have to put an instrument into the vagina to look at the cervix for people that aren't medical. And they think that if they had not said that they were queer, that whole process would have been much more gentler and smoother, which, to be honest, is actually assault, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the case.
Yeah, that's warranting a complaint.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
not
exactly.
People
But
don't
people
have
just
the-
No,
ever
but
change.
people don't feel empowered enough
They really
to
don't.
declare those things. And I think, going back to your point that you raised, if somebody is going to have those prejudices and they're going to go on a day where somebody tells them to treat all people equally, actually I think rather than have that person forced into treating people that they can't seem to see as equal, I think remove those people and from that service and get people that actively want to provide that service in specialist clinics. That's what I think.
Because we're centering the service users. I want to provide the best service for the service users. And if that means hiring specialist people, that's what I'm going to do.
But we're talking about urban areas like London and Brighton. What about if you're queer in Doncaster or Huddersfield or, like the Scotland, like big place? Like obviously there's not a good set of resources for the NHS, but ideally people could walk into anywhere. Like that's ideally what I would want to see.
Absolutely.
And then there's obviously like lots of training to be done. But I think centering it into smaller and smaller areas, like Dean Street's great, but most of Dean Street's clinic population are white men, fairly affluent.
But anyone can use Dean Street.
Anyone can, but will they,
That's what I'm
Can
saying
they?
about language. So it's up to Dean Street to be like, we need more. We need literature that has different people. So it shows that we are making an effort.
So just
We need to entice folk in.
What Dean Street is again.
Oh, okay.
I do my little explains because not everybody that watches or is in the audience again is medical. Dean Street is quite a big sexual health clinic in central London in Soho, and because it's centred in Soho, predominantly the demographic that access the clinic are white affluent gay men, but it's done a lot of pioneering work in terms of PrEP access and PEP and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
In the NHS, we all do get like a foundation of training, but it's usually on the internet. You can do it at home, and you tick a box, and it's done and dusted. We should expect that everybody that treats us, me included, when I see the doctor, I expect a standardized level of care. I am human, regardless of my gender and my ethnicity. I'm still human. If somebody is not treating you as a human forever, we should all feel more empowered to make complaints about that. That's baseline. In terms of people accessing care, like you said, I want these specialist clinics to make it attractive to folk like us, because what other way is there? There are so many bigoted people in the NHS. I know this is going out, but I know I know people who have said stuff where I've been like, whoa, but I'm a middle grade doctor. There is only so much I can do without losing my job and then being taken away from the pool of people that actually want to drive difference.
Sure.
So it's hard, and I hear you. The utopian would be that everybody just likes gay people, but do you know, or queer people, but mate, like,
Yeah.
I can't even talk. I would love to talk to you more about the painful experiences of folk that work in the NHS and how things are really, really sometimes not very nice, but
I hear you.
that's a whole different conversation.
But we can't get all the gays in London, and I think it'd be easy for us to be London-centric.
I think that's a really, and
It's
obviously,
true.
as I mentioned at the beginning, I actually am based now in the East Midlands, so I'm based in Leicester, and there is, everything can often be London-centric, and other areas can be slower to develop, and I think, you know, the other thing that also happens is I think the people that want to drive things forward often also congregate in the big
This is
cities,
true. This is
especially
true.
with medicine.
This
So
is
then
true.
you get this huge lag in other towns and smaller cities in terms of services and innovation and that kind of thing. So I think that's another issue in terms of access and specifically with things like with PrEP as well. Like the message was, you know, it happened in London and everywhere else. It's like really kind of slow to trickle around the rest of the country, and we do need to be better at that. Did anybody want to say anything more
Just sit
about
back.
the creation of like specialist services or anything like that before we move on to
I just kind of want to add that although we're mostly talking about sexual health services, we have to think about the demographics that are disproportionately affected by HIV, and those groups should be focused on, and they should have their own specialist services. But then when you have to think about mental health, and you have to think of mental health of people of colour, and the mental health of queer people of colour, there's a lot of stuff lacking there. So there's, for example, a lot of black queer men in particular are not going to mental health services as much, or they're not going into talking therapies, and all of these pockets need to be like focused on as well.
I think that's such a key point. I keep talking about it and I need to stop because people will get very bored. But Queenie, the book by Candice Carter-Williams, which I keep plugging everywhere I go now.
Plug it today.
Podcast, BBC Sounds, free. It's free. Podcast it. It's free. It's brilliant.
I think obviously that is the experience of a cis black woman of Caribbean descent. It's like #1 Times bestseller list. And so she's taken it to a lot of people. But it discusses, I think, how much mental health and reproductive sexual health are interlinked. And at most sexual health clinics, you will get like psychosexual counsellors, but there is just not enough focus on the overlap there and trying to address these things in a holistic fashion. That's what I personally feel, especially for people of colour, where I think, you know, they really are very, very strongly intertwined.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that there needs to be more holistic services with mental health and sexual health together, because well, I can say from experience, having poor mental health can lead to having poor sexual health.
Absolutely. I mean,
But like, the thing is, it's like
it's a
mental
straight
health
line.
is
It's
over
like,
here,
yeah.
sexual health is over here,
Yeah.
and then with mental health, it's like mental health for people of colour is over here, and mental health for queer people is over here. We need to start working towards all these intersections and focusing on them and trying to benefit those services.
Can I ask you a question, Phil?
Sure.
Can you speak on the specific relationship between PrEP and its impact on like psychosexual well-being of gay men,
Sure, I know what
given the
you're
history of the last 30 years? Go.
Also, can you,
Go.
can you just explain what PrEP is?
Yeah,
Most
I
people
mean,
will know, but
yeah.
you've been speaking about it a lot, but just
Okay, so PrEP is the HIV prevention drug. So you take it before and after sex, which stops you from getting HIV. And also stops, it protects you from HIV, and anyone that you sleep with would be, I guess, protected as well. What was the question?
Again, so the link
How it links-
between
okay.
mental health, PrEP, and psychosexual well-being of gay men in the last
Okay, so
30 years.
as a gay man, from as soon as I guess was sexually active, I was always thinking about HIV. Was kind of always in the room with me, or is always in the back of my head, or thinking I'm at risk whether I used condoms or not. And like the interesting thing that PrEP has done is that it changes your narrative with sex. So as a gay man, you kind of live with the internalized homophobia, and you may have mental health issues, and you have I guess maybe some unresolved emotional trauma and stuff like that, which we kind of all have as queer people in general. But I think it kind of normalizes that type of sex for you, because it doesn't see it as demonized, or it doesn't see the sex that you're having is wrong. And I think there's a link between being extremely sexually active and kind of starting PrEP, and then kind of seeing life differently, and seeing what kind of sex you're having and who you're having it with and why you're having it with these certain people, and it makes you think of things differently and think more proactively about your safety.
That's so beautiful to hear.
It's really great.
Oh, thank you. That was not in a patronising way. I mean, I feel really.
and that's why I think you and Josina, for all the advocacy that you're doing, but we absolutely need to keep having that conversation, because it keeps being framed as, this reckless thing for people to go out and be reckless. And
Yeah, but the thing is, when straight people have sex, it's just sex. But when gay people have sex, then it's like demonized. It's like they're having the wrong kind of sex, and they're doing things that are unholy or whatever.
Yeah. How many straight people go clubbing and take pills and have sex with various people over one weekend, and it's not called chemsex? It's only gay men that have chemsex.
Speak it.
yeah, that's a very valid point. Duca, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much said all the time that it's hard to focus on just one thing. In answer to a question that you asked earlier on, I think there's an absolute imperative to target marginalised people when it comes to sexual health, mental health services. I think there's a responsibility to target those people, because those people don't know. They don't see, they're alienated from the system in lots of cases. They don't know what's available to them.
Absolutely.
They don't have a name for what's happening to them or for what they're experiencing. And so I think that obviously some people will seek care, but other people really do need to be told, this is something that you can talk about, this is something that exists. Speak very briefly about my experience with sexual health and mental health. Earlier this year and throughout the last few years, I'd had I think I texted you about them. I used to have these attacks, really physical, painful, just episodes. I didn't know what to call them, so I would call it an attack, or I'd call it an episode, and I knew it happened around the same time as my period, and I went to repeatedly my GP about it, saw lots of different people. It would be I'd be walking home from somewhere, and then I'd be physically overcome, would have to lie down on the floor, I'd be bleeding. And then one happened when I was at work, and I was in pain for 2 days afterwards. And I went to I went to the GP, and they were like, oh, it sounds like a panic attack, and gave me some, gave me just some information about it. I was like, I don't know if it's a panic attack, because I haven't accessed mental health services. I don't know I don't have language to talk about that stuff. But I was so scared of feeling that pain about being disabled by it in the street or when I was doing stuff. But I couldn't get her to accept that it was real, or give me any medication, or talk to me about it any further than that. So then separately, as part of my sorting out what's going on in my life, I went to see a therapist. for the first time. And I spoke to her about this, and she suggested that it might be psychosomatic as well. But I think that for me, it was very important that I saw a female therapist of colour. I think the most important thing, I still don't know I think also you think, I was like, this is really terrifying because if it's in my head, it's not real. And through the discussions that I've had this year is that it's not, it has the same effect, whether it's something that's triggered by an emotional response, a trauma response. If I'm having these physical effects, it's as valid as
Absolutely.
a disease, and it's something
Absolutely.
that I can feel like I have authority to tackle and
Absolutely.
investigate, and
Absolutely.
because it's just as important. And so I think that was really valuable, accessing whether through a coincidence people that were qualified to talk about this.
Absolutely.
And to help me understand that those things were related.
I think, you brought up really important issues in terms of, it comes up from time and time again in terms of not being listened to. And I don't know what that GP was like. I don't know if that was another person of colour or whatever, but just people feeling like they're dismissed more.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one last thing which I forgot, which is that with that therapist, she was like without being as dismissive as the GP had been, said that it might be linked to a psychological thing. But she asked me, because I was like, the thing is, it always happens when I'm on my period, and she was like, well, how do you feel about being on your period? How do you feel about your body? And that kind of holistic approach to that entirety, because I'm like, oh well, the symptom only happens at a certain time in my cycle, and so it must be linked to that, but without even just kind of abstracting my body as a thing to be treated separately. And also in terms of the fact that a panic attack can exacerbate those physical symptoms, and by getting into the fear of this is going to happen to me, just by making it worse and worse. So
There's tons of research which show, really sorry that happened to you.
No, that's fine.
But there's tons of research that shows that black women's pain isn't taken seriously.
You don't even have to tell me twice. I just want to give a really quick story about black pain and blackness. So I had an ex who had a really sudden onset abdominal pain, lying on the floor, called me, Ronks, I can't get up. I was like, that's an ovarian cyst that's ruptured. Go to the doctors. Went to the GP. She was white British. GP did a scan, sent her to the hospital. She had a scan on that day. If you are a medical professional, to get an ultrasound, to get an ultrasound on the day that you present to the GP is again like finding a leprechaun at the end of the rainbow. Nevertheless, she went to the GP, she went to the hospital, got a scan, blood in her pelvis, very little, it will absorb. They said, we'll see you in a couple of weeks, take some painkillers. So me this Christmas had the same symptoms. Just lay at home, I'm not with my ex anymore, single. I was at home, sudden onset pelvic pain. I was like, my appendix is out, this is going to be an ovarian cyst. As you're a doctor, you just know the certain signs and symptoms. So I went to work, because as doctors, we don't go to the doctor, we just take painkillers sometimes, and then just go to work and try and look after patients as we're just, and I couldn't walk. So my colleague said, go to hospital, you need to go to your GP. So I went to the GP. GP was like, white man, middle-aged, first of all, didn't acknowledge I was a doctor. I'm going to allow that, whatever. And then he said, sounds like, you're on telly, you're working in A&E, really busy department, could be IBS. He thought, so my abdominal pain, I run about 10K, maybe 3 times a week. I couldn't walk. He told me it's probably IBS. I know that I ruptured an ovarian cyst. I know that I should have had an ultrasound. But even as a doctor, I felt, and it's really weird, this feeling of not being able to say what you want, even though you know what you want. And for the first time in a very long time, I was like, fuck, this is how other people feel when they go to the doctor, and it could be any doctor, they don't have to be white middle class, and say, this is how I feel. Because especially as a black woman, your symptoms, I was told, calm down. Have you taken any painkillers? Oh, don't be silly, lay flat. Oh, that can't hurt. Well, you're saying the pain is here and here. It can't be here and here, doctor. Suddenly I'm doctor, despite turning up and him calling me Ronky. So this kind of like minimizing of black women's pain, and this is physical pain. When we start talking about mental pain, which, you know, needs the same value as physical pain, that's a whole nother subject.
So,
I'm
That's
going
been
to
my
take a step
experience
back
as
now.
well.
I've just like,
what you've said is so key, and it's come up in lots of other panels previously in terms of this pain. And there's, I think there were some studies in the US about black patients and people of colour not receiving the same amount of pain relief. And then in terms of mental capacity, there's very much that black strong stereotype that happens, and that is another thing that happens. And then there was another article that I read a while back about Asian women and how there's this idea that they're always kind of complaining in terms of medical professionals, like this aching all over business, that their pain is vague, and often, you know, and actually it kind of feeds into this hysteria thing. So there is that they're being hysterical.
all over body pain.
And
Yeah.
just feeling just generally, and you can't pinpoint it, so therefore
It's just language.
It doesn't exist.
It's just language.
So I think there is much to be said about kind of these prejudices and how they then, you know, deny people care. But I think it's so powerful that you, as a really
doctor,
really good,
loud,
and vocal A&E doctor, went to their GP and felt that they couldn't articulate precisely what they needed in that moment.
No, I knew what I needed. You wouldn't give it to me.
Yeah, but you couldn't.
That honestly, I needed an ultrasound, and I felt like shit.
Which bodes very, very badly for
Everybody else.
to be honest. And it says a lot about that.
What was the end result of that?
Oh, I just let the pain continue for a couple of weeks, and then I knew I was going to be fine. I just wanted to know. I just wanted to be told that, yes, there is fluid in your pelvis. I just wanted to follow the same pathway as my ex did, basically. And we can put that template onto lots of different, like, so black lads. Black lads are treated a certain way. Black queer lads, imagine you've got the intersection of being queer as well. And that's why I definitely believe that services need to be pinpointed and targeted, because I could have died. I could have just been bleeding. I mean, that's the big extreme, but I could have been bleeding into my pelvis.
Well,
and it was.
there's studies shown, like, not to.
Oh, we die in childbirth.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another line.
So the rate of black women dying in childbirth is higher than all other ethnic
5
groups.
times.
5 times. Imagine.
5 times for black women, I think 2.5 times for Asian women.
Go for it.
That's why it's also important to have black professional, medical professionals as well. So like I had, a few years ago, I had placental abruption.
Oh my days, I'm sorry.
So I lost my child, but I was bleeding.
I'm sorry.
I was bleeding a lot, and the midwife kept telling the doctors and the consultants, this girl's bleeding, and none of them believed her. So she stripped my bedding and put it aside just to prove to them that I was bleeding.
I'm so sorry.
Excessively. So it's really, really important that we're in those spaces as well, and that's why I'm so grateful to have black midwives, because they took care of me a little bit different to the other midwives. So I don't think I would even be here if it was for that midwife.
I'm sorry.
And it is the Black Midwife Association or groupings that's fighting for better maternal care for black women. It's no surprise that that's the case.
So thanks for sharing that, and it's definitely something I think we should delve into slightly more in the Q&A. Definitely in terms of it is something that the system is becoming more aware of, though, just to reassure you. But there is definitely something to be said. It's good for people in the room to hear it, and obviously people that go and listen to this afterwards, that people of colour do really feel, and we don't have a great amount of studies, and people are very selective about what they research, and this is something else this is about saying, please, can we do research on things that we know are manifesting this lived experience? Because we know that when we go into our consultation rooms, when we sit in A&E, that these things are happening to us, but it's like anecdotal, because nobody wants to research what is a glaringly obvious issue, and nothing gets done about anything either unless you have data.
This is evidence-based.
And that is evidence-based, because that's the society that we live in. So at the moment, it's apart from this 5 times, and nobody's really gone to really look into that 5 times. We have vague ideas you know, that say that education or socioeconomic, but we know in the States when these things are controlled for, actually, African American women are still more likely in significant numbers to die in childbirth. So
regardless of their economic or
Beyonce,
socioeconomic
we can
status.
talk about
Yeah.
Beyonce and Serena Williams
I am
experiences.
going
Sorry,
to-
we don't have to, but yeah.
I'm going to bring it back so we can say things for the Q&A. But this is kind of touching upon like our final few topics. It was just discussing specific issues that you think affect your communities, which we've kind of touched upon. One thing I think that came out in kind of pre-discussions is smears and accessing smears as a smear test as a queer person. Or as just generally a person of colour. I've written about my own experience in terms of having a smear, and mine was just the fact that the nurse who was in the room doing it was auntie, and this is the thing about sometimes thinking that people that are like you will get it. She was like, I know your dad. And I was like, why are you telling me you know my dad when I've come here for my follow-up? You know, smear about something that is sexually, you know, related, and you also telling me as I have a speculum in my vagina, you know. So yeah, it's just if anybody on the panel has specific issues that they feel need to kind of be addressed, or you know, can speak to smears or something else that's not quite working.
May I?
Yes, please.
So I'm like, I've been staring at this question for this a bit, and I think if we're talking about like how quickly the systems could change or how who works in the systems, I feel like if that's not gonna, who knows when that will happen. I think it's why, and then I think about the young people of colour that I've worked with when it comes to sex and relationships health, and I think it's one of the reasons why I'm such a big advocate for working with young people and having these conversations instead. And more it's about, I don't trust the systems to ever do us good. And so it's, I feel like I am much better off supporting the young ones to be like better at having that fight. And so the more of us, like these are some of the people that I work with, I'm trying to get like more people who look like us to work there. And it's a really hard battle, but I think the more of us that go to schools and then we're like, if they can see us having these difficult conversations, but also being relatable and like accessible visually.
Absolutely.
And then also like have the difficult conversations with them, because we're actually not their uncles, we don't actually know them. We're not related to them. But we also like actually are one of them. So that in 5 years, they're not going to be saying stuff like, the idea of sexual health isn't a joke to them, because their virginity, they're not going to lose their virginity when they're married. It's actually not going to happen. Like, don't lie. Like, it's not going to happen in a mosque. Like, it's not going to be Isha, right? You're not going to be wearing religious clothing. Like, you're going to get, I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's not going to be. It's not going to be like that, what they think it is. To almost like bring in the kind of the severity of the consequences. I've watched too many young men of colour like shut down when it's a white person telling them, because queerness is a white thing to them, and sexual health is a white thing to them, and promiscuity, which is an interesting one, especially for young men of colour, where there's a disconnect between like, if the guys do it, it's kind of like, it's all right, but we won't talk about it. If the girl does it, we're done. And that's, I think having that conversation at that age is really helpful, because that means in 5 years they're going to be ready to like have that fight when they go to the doctor, and they're going to have the words and the language to use and the drive to demand better for themselves.
Absolutely.
That was it. I think I'm done.
No, that was really beautiful. Thank you. I think I always say that language is so key. And yeah, hopefully, you know, people, young people will end up with a better outcome, and it will continually get better in terms of people advocating for themselves.
Can I make a point about language? There's a lot of heteronormativity in terms of talking about sex. So doctors may ask you, when were you last sexually active, and when they mean specific penis in a vagina, going at it till orgasm. of the male, I guess, that will result in ejaculation. That's what they mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, and no other sexual activity counts. And then, you know, the default is if you're going in for contraception that you've got a boyfriend, and the default sometimes also being that for some people that you shouldn't be getting pregnant, you shouldn't want to get pregnant. I've had really invasive questions from a doctor about, oh, what are you going to do after contraception if you don't want an implant? None of your business. I'm 30 now. If I have a kid, it's not the end of the world. But there is that's a racism thing, because, you know, black women are seen to be more responsible around like our sexual health, and it comes across in the words that doctors will use, I think.
I think, so just picking up on the point that you made, I've had some experiences where I was just really shocked by, so we had, so I've seen this a few times, but a lesbian woman accessing abortion, and there was a lot of talk from the staff about why she would be there, as in you can't be a lesbian if you need an abortion. And I was honestly just gobsmacked that this is the level of ignorance that we were dealing with. It was also just not really relevant
or appropriate to talk about in a public forum.
And I thought that was quite that was really shocking. So I mean, I just thought, how are people supposed to access care when we're still dealing with these basic levels of judgment? And that will manifest in somebody's body language, you know, that it will, and the person will be aware that you have some level of disdain for something that they're doing. It's already bad enough that, you know, abortion's a stigmatized service, coupled with the fact that you're now going there as a queer person, and that added level of judgment.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever come out to like a medical professional that's been treating me, and I've had the same experience that you describe of people being like, well, are you using contraception, and like, have you been sexually active, and you just sort of edit out your actual experience. I have a friend who's a lesbian who was having her smear test, and she had to answer all these questions before she was basically like, no, because I'm a lesbian and I only date women. And the medical professional was like, oh, I thought so, quite snug. Which is, yeah.
These are our people.
I mean,
They're not my people.
I'm a doctor. This is, you know, these.
Oh my god.
I think like I think you have to be like, I think there's a whole like my like thing is like, I'm gonna avoid drama, I'm gonna avoid talking about this, I don't want to take this on. And I think it is so valuable to see yourself reflected in the people, to feel like they've got some sense of knowledge. But like you said, with like the auntie doing your smear test, I think sometimes when I'm around other people of colour, I feel like there's a sense of familiarity that I don't necessarily want. There's like a lack of like professionalism. Like when I kept on going in for these, going in for blood tests, she was like, oh, I'm not really meant to have my nails like this, like wasn't wearing her gloves. She was like, oh, but don't tell anyone.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Yeah. I mean, you also can ask to see someone else. I really want us to have this empowerment. How dare she not wear her gloves when she's touching you?
Yeah. But it's like, and I think there's also stuff that you tell yourself about how you should be like, I don't, even though I know like, you know, like I understand about mental health and I know these things, like I think I'm not like, I think if you're like a marginalised person in any way, you get used to pain being a part of your life, pain is part of your hair, pain is part of your existence. You don't need to take painkillers unless it gets really bad. You don't need to like voice stuff. I remember once I was having a bikini wax, and at the end of it, the woman was like, oh wow, you've got like a really high pain threshold. And I was like, I was in so much pain. I just didn't make a noise. I just didn't say anything because I didn't think it was, I didn't think it was okay to make noise. And I remember hearing someone like screaming what was happening, and I was just like, I didn't know you were allowed to vocalize.
And also, if we scream, police will be called. Do you know what I mean?
So I was just like, you put all this stuff on yourself. You'll say like, this is something like, I work in like the entertainment industry, like loads of comedians are very mentally fucked up, but I'm just like, I think like that's a white thing. I'm like, I don't need this. Like, you think that you are strong, or you think that my problems are so small, you don't allow yourself to vocalize it, and you allow like, someone in my family was like, oh, if you use a tampon, that means you've lost your virginity.
Yeah, so this something actually came up on one of our previous panels when we discussed like South Asian women's sexual health, and the fact that, you know, it was seen very much as like your wife give you a tampon, you'd be like, can't use that, because for us we were like, oh no, our virginity, and our parents like made that really taboo, and I think that's
Nonsense.
really common myths that we get.
But I think that
with,
part of like I think most black women in some way want to be a strong, independent black woman. They want to have that myth about themselves. They want to be able to take on like these stereotypes and narratives about themselves, or these stereotypes and narratives about what a queer person should be like, to believe that, I mean, like, I don't need necessarily to talk about myself, but I've like never even thought about using like contraception, practicing safe sex when I've had sex with female-bodied people, because it's just a conversation that I've never had. I don't know how to like recognize loads of stuff about my own genitals, other people's genitals that I'm having sex with, to have any of those conversations. And people will say something like, oh, we don't need to wear sunscreen, like this isn't relevant, you can't catch this. And I don't know if it's true.
Just to,
but yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, because I want to leave enough time for Q&A, but just to round up, and on that point, I actually think, and I'd be interested to hear what people's opinions are, is actually really important for people of colour, and it's partly what this is about, to have ongoing sexual and reproductive health discussions, more so than our white counterparts, especially in the diaspora, just because of all the additional cultural barriers that we face. But I actually think that we learn things. Not all of it's nonsense. Some of it comes from, you know, certain places.
Nonsense. Let's give it a proper name, because we're already minimising the fact that it's come from colonial. A lot of it is nonsense.
A lot of it is nonsense, and there's lots of superstition and other things. But I think it is imperative that we have ongoing discussions, because we come into our own, or I think later, because of these additional influences. Sometimes not for everybody, but you know, where people sometimes think that a 25-year-old person of colour should be at, I often find quite interesting, because I'm like, you think that they should have all of this information and be able to navigate this, but I was like, they didn't discuss all the things that they were free and open, somebody from maybe a white household, or just a household that's more open sometimes, that were able to discuss at like 16 to 18, you know. Some of
I think that's giving a bit too much credit to white families.
No. Yeah, no, as I said, it's not necessarily a blanket thing, but I do think that some families of colour, especially if it's, you know, you're talking like first generation and that kind of thing, are just they're coming into information exceptionally late. I remember something from medical school where we had a couple that they basically had sex. It was a South Asian couple. They literally lived around the corner. They had only been sexually active, I think, for like the last month. They were in their early 20s, and they didn't know enough about sex to not understand that they couldn't lie and have pillow talk, that they had rushed to the clinic for the morning after pill, literally fresh from intercourse. Literally, like, we were like, when did you have sex? And they said, literally like 20 minutes ago. Because they thought it needed to be like that quick. You know, they hadn't used any protection. And that was in their early 20s. So I do think sometimes we are on the back foot, and I don't think it's widely understood, especially in these wider discussions we're having around SRE at the moment, that we're dealing with a lot of other nuances. Yes. Anyway, on that note, enough chatter from me, and hopefully from others. I think take it to the audience for questions, so you're not all too exhausted. Yes. Yep. Just kickstart.
Hello. Thank you all for speaking. I've got a couple of questions. So for Rox.
Hello. What's your name and your pronouns, please?
Gayatri, she, her.
Thank you.
So you speak to a lot of young people
Yes.
about
Everything.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, the language you use when you talk about virginity, I don't like that word. It's quite...
Virginity?
Yeah.
Did I use it?
No, sorry. It's
Oh, okay. Okay, so you don't like the word virginity, got it.
And it's not to sort of say, oh, you know, we should never use it, because I understand why, you know, it's just gives some people quite a clear understanding of where they're at, or the people that they're treating are at. But if young people are talking to you about that, what is the language that you use to make it more inclusive and, you know, to describe the things that they're doing? Let's start with that, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for your question. So one of the interesting things, I think one of the lucky things that I have is that I think that I look visibly queer. I think kids that know me or come to the department are already mindful, you know, the coding. They're already like, oh, that's a queer doctor. We have a very firm structure in paediatrics called a HEADS assessment, and there are words and languages which are kind of like all doctors should be using when it comes to interacting with young people, LGBTQI+, about having sex, sexual activities, etc. You have to tailor your language to the person that you're speaking to. So yesterday, just to give you a quick example, I spoke to a 9-year-old who was having, I better be very, very, very vague about this, a young 9-year-old who was having a issue with their genitals. And essentially, I had a concern that this might be an STI, and that young person was only 9 years old. So if you want to broach that with a young person, you need to make sure that there's an appropriate adult in the room also. I just asked them, you've got the physical, so you've got the physiological aspect of erections, etc., and then you've got the interactions that that person is having with another person. So my concern was that it might be an STI. It wasn't. So you just start off with like, is there anybody at school that you like? And I always generalize it, is it? And I do say boy and girl, because for young people, especially at 9-year-old, that language is the language that they're used to. When they're older, maybe male presenting, female presenting, trans, blah, blah, blah. But you tailor it to the person you're speaking to. I often say, have you ever been intimate with them? Loads of young people know what intimate means. Do you ever have feelings that make you feel really nice inside? Or do you have feelings which worry you because some people come out or they fancy someone maybe of the same gender and it makes them feel uncomfortable? Languages, I've never used, do you know what? That's why I was like, did I say virgin? I don't think I've ever used the word virgin. Kids will say it, they'll say, I'm a virgin, I've still got my hymen. And I'll be like, how do you know you still got your hymen? Well, and I'm like, and then there's a discussion about the anatomical, where the hymen is, etc., etc. I don't think I've got like, I'm now thinking that I don't have like a one unique answer to answer you, but I definitely know that the language that I use is tailored to the human being. I definitely, when I am an open person, so we're going to talk about things that people do with other people, I would say, like, have you ever put your lips on another person? Have you ever been naked with another person? Have you seen another person naked? Have you ever touched somebody else's body? Where have you touched? So they're all really open questions so that it's up to the young person to narrow it down, and then you take those cues. That is a really difficult thing to learn. I love young people. I love being queer. I want all young people to, I don't want them to live the childhood that I lived. So I make it a point of being present and available. And my work colleagues will say, oh, Ronks, there's this person, they're trying to tell me stuff about their sexuality. I don't think that I'm good at it. Do you mind? I think that's okay. I think it's okay to know when you maybe not be the right person for that human. So I don't think I've got a template, but I definitely feel, and this has come with, I'm 35 now, I've been a doctor for a while, so it's come with a lot of practice, a lot of feedback. I'm often being taught by young people as well, and we say, we don't use that word anymore, we use this. I'm like, oh, don't tell me that. So yeah, so I think it's important to know that there is no one language, that language is in flux, and that you're often being taught, and you should do your reading.
But for an older young person...
How old are we talking?
Okay, so...
Because they really
you were
are...
talking about a 9-year-old.
Yeah, that was yesterday.
Like, so, yeah, like when I worked on a helpline with young people, and they were know, 16 to 25, maybe like 12 to 25, first-time sex or having sex for the first time, but then defining like, okay, what does sex mean for you the younger they are as well, because that may, like, and having a broader definition of what sex is better for people, and it's more queer inclusive, more trans inclusive. And just PSA to everyone that we shouldn't normalise first-time sex hurting. Like, lube can go a long way to making experiences quite nice, and hymens are, I mean, a bit of a myth sometimes.
I mean, I'm not even sure they exist. I'm not sure.
Hymens, same thing.
There's a great article written by a writer on Gallen that talks about this, and it's not too much of a long read, but the construction of virginity and rejecting that, and it was a great read for me, and it's something that I thought about, but I probably hadn't maybe thought about as deeply. I do think it is something that needs to be discussed a bit more in SRE, and because I think it creates a lot of ongoing stigma. And then people put a lot of emphasis on it as well, because then you should remember your first time. And I'm like, well, actually, it's kind of all right not to as well. Like.
And also, your first time might not be penetrative sex. So let's.
Yes, you had another. You have. Yeah.
I didn't have one. So SRE for people of colour who are also queer. What would that look like? So in schools, we're trying to get it to be more inclusive. How do we, well, for you guys, what would it be like in your day-to-day lives to reach queer young people of colour? Like, do we have a club that they come to? I mean, that's...
I would love a club when I was younger. When I was younger, I would have loved a club.
The aunties up in arms about that.
Whose aunties?
Well, if we had like a club...
Oh, aunties. I was like, what aunties? I don't care about them aunties.
That's a tricky one. I think it's really important that people of colour are in the room, I guess, or facilitating or running, I guess, if it's workshops or what it is. I think there needs to be maybe like a general thing where it's not so much, like when I was in school, I was taught the mechanics of heterosexual sex, and then that was it. So I wasn't taught anything about STIs, I wasn't taught anything about consent or sexual assertiveness or anything like that. So all of that would have to come into play as well. So I think it's not so much about the physical side of sex, but it's about everything surrounding it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Partners and stuff, also, like, a lot of the time, a lot of frontline youth workers who may be talking SRE to young people, like, it's quite, youth work can be diverse in, like, urban areas, especially, like, as a profession. I did some work where we were training youth workers on how to not be massively homophobic, because that was something they would use to bond with young people over.
Really?
Yeah, like the more you enforce like a gender stereotype or like sexuality norms that young people have normalised at school, then that would decrease like the social distance between an adult and a young person. But then when it, like, sometimes when we were teaching young people, we'd go into a youth club, we'd teach them sex education stuff, and then the youth worker would be the most disruptive force in the room because they're trying to get the young people on side, you know, it's a sort of pseudo dad or mum thing.
Wow.
It's messed up.
That's really
interesting.
Yeah, I think, what do I think? I think the first thing that came to my head is like protecting the young person, and so it's quite hard. It's quite hard to find the access routes to supporting queer people of colour, because they might be queer, but they're also minors, and they're also vulnerable, and they're also, I don't want to make assumptions about their like lives.
Absolutely.
But you kind of have to make some assumptions about their lives in order to provide that level of care, like really vigilantly. And so it's kind of hard. I guess it's like, I hate saying this, but I feel like maybe working really closely with the schools, like really closely. But then you need the schools to be on side, and it also puts a lot of pressure on the schools, and lots of schools are already struggling. So it's all just like a whole load of shit, right? But what you need is, so where I've seen it happen really beautifully, specifically in schools in East London, where all the kids, not all, like every 1 in 100 kid is white. Like those schools, what's really beautiful is when the teachers are great and really want us to come in and give us a space to run that. It's almost like a covert youth work.
Yeah.
They don't, they're just excited to have somebody come in and talk about, tell me about all of the porn that you've watched. I never asked that, by the way, never. But then, and then within that, at some stage in that conversation, you might come out as queer, or if they ask a question about queerness, they get, we don't always like put ourselves open on the line like that, but if they ask a question, the right person is answering it. And so it's like dropping little bits like that. Like actually, like youth clubs are actually the answer, right? And like people who are running the youth clubs should be either like not homophobic at all, not like minimally, just like not, or queer.
I absolutely agree.
But these are all dreams, right? Because like I say this, and there's like 0 youth clubs.
But they're not dreams. We have to like try and hold on to that. At the moment, it seems dreamlike because everything is closing and shutting, and Brexit has the world's attention, and that's all anybody wants to talk about. But we do need to also, I think, and this is what some of you on this panel are doing, which is great. It's you're making those dreams semi-manifest and pushing against these things, and I think it's really important that we continue to do so and we're not defeatist, because then it will just get worse actually.
Can I quickly just say, the great thing about what you said is that when you speak to young people, if there's one young person that you said a truth, so you know there's all the fake truths, you say a truth, that young person goes and tells someone else, and they really do, like the way that things propagate with young people is amazing. So even if you're not able to talk to a whole group of people, if you get one young person who's part of a gang, it just so I believe that our youngers are, they are the future, like they're the future, but I mean like I feel really positive, I really do feel positive. Okay, right.
No, like
wow.
No, I was supposed to react faster.
Yeah, no. I just was like, you all went like.
I was also like, all I was thinking about was like how hard it is.
It is, and I get exhausted, but it is.
I'm actually like sunshine and bunnies most of the time. It's just.
You're tired. You're tired.
But you also don't need to be like that, which I guess is also really important.
I agree.
That people feel
But yes,
I am really excited. I am, and I.
guys, we get a few more.
Chatting to us, it's really great. I've just got a question.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, I'm Almaz. Hi.
Pronouns.
Oh, my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you.
I've noticed that the queer community is way better at doing non-monogamy than the straight cis community. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how some of the positives of non-monogamy can be proliferated to everyone.
Firstly, I would like to say we need to be very careful, because what I'm noticing now in our queer community is that non-monogamy or polyamory is also kind of an excuse for some folk to misbehave. The people that I know that are truly polyamorous have multiple partners and really care about the people that they're with. There is a real respect, a real love that I don't have enough energy for that, but it's different. It's different from some of my friends who have entered polyamorous relationships, have been like, yeah, but it doesn't work, because essentially they want to just be with that person. And there is always one, not always, but there often is one person in that polyamorous circle that is just getting more sex with more people than everyone else. And there isn't the honesty about actually how uncomfortable that is. So polyamorous, I'm not polyamorous. I don't have the energy, the time, or that much love. But there are lots of people that, and I've seen it. I have a friend who does it beautifully, and I look at them and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then I've got other folks who are just brokenhearted because they wanted to be with that person and decided that they would pretend to be polyamorous just to partake in that relationship. So that's my little bugbear, but go on.
Can I just pick up on that point? You might want to clarify, but in terms of, very much in terms of polygamy, not obviously within the British context, but if you go obviously West Africa and Nigeria, that is like the status, well not the status quo, but that's like a legal thing, and that is very normalised in terms of heterosexual relations and having a polygamous household and the setup being that way. And historically there's many reasons for that, and actually it's funny because it's become more heteronormative. There's a really great ethnography called Male Daughters and Sister Husbands, Sister Wives by Zed Books, which displays how polygamy currently, especially in West Africa, because it's about Igbo tribe, has actually narrowed to this kind of to a patriarchy. But before, actually, there was kind of a much more fluidity there. So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate, but I in this setting, I definitely think you're correct that it's monogamy is definitely a heteronormative, seemingly more structure, and then we've got this whole structure that we can go into about polygamy and risk within queer communities, and people saying that it's risky, which has obviously it has a different evidence base. But I definitely think where you go to other countries elsewhere, it doesn't necessarily follow that way.
I think I disagree to an extent about queer people's being better at polygamy. I think especially if you haven't been out for like most of your life and you're sort of entering queer spaces, I think there's a danger that touches on some of the stuff we discussed earlier, is that a lot of your experience with your new community, with finding partners, is extremely sexualized. A lot of queer spaces, like you're like delighted to like find all these nights and all these spaces, but there are people there who are predatory. You're constantly emphasized to like emphasize yourself, to be sexually attractive. There aren't a lot of spaces where you can just chill out and be queer and not be like, oh, what's happening? Who's here? What do I look like? What, like, who's like doing this? So like you kind of have lots of like super hypersexualized encounters. It feels a bit, and I speak only to my experience as someone like as a baby queer coming into spaces that it's kind of like the Wild West and it's unregulated and you can go out and do whatever you want. And if you are someone that's not following the template, a heteronormative template for your life, then you're like, why not experience like different structures of relationship, different ways of being around people? I do see that that's like sometimes being in an open relationship or being polygamous is just an excuse for someone to be emotionally unavailable to multiple people at once. But I think I don't know if we are good at it, because I don't know if we always have those support systems in place. I say that as someone that kind of takes advantage of that kind of lifestyle, but I think, I don't know, like takes advantage is a weird word. I think we have to be really careful about it, because we're figuring stuff out. Like it's such a privilege for me in queer relationships to be able to be like, I don't have to be told that this person is dominant, that this person can control, that I owe this to someone else. But there also aren't a lot of people telling you how to be a good person about it, or how to be a caring person, who to prioritize, when to prioritize yourself, and when to prioritize other people. And
just in terms of the idea of where it's come from in terms of polygamy, especially amongst gay men. I remember reading a history about kind of the
language clarification. Polygamy being multiple wives, polyandry being multiple husbands, polyamory being multiple lovers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's no legal aspect to the multiple lovers.
Sorry. Thank you for that clarification, because I'm just dancing around doing the same word for everything. In terms of the history, I think I was reading that a lot of polyamory with the gay community, particularly among gay men, was obviously there's a lack of risk of pregnancy, and then how that was reshaped during the 80s actually, when obviously there was an increased heightened risk of HIV, and then how obviously that changed the process slightly, and how that's why one aspect why there may be a certain different dynamic there in terms of like pregnancy risk, and then how STIs have reshaped that concept. And it really speaks to, I think, how some of our, I guess, the manifestations of things we do socially actually sometimes have a more kind of, I guess, influenced by other things like health and biology sometimes potentially.
Yeah. I don't want to sound too jaded about like polyamory and queer communities. Like, could provide a balanced perspective. Like, if we think about like the spectrum of like good relationships to bad relationships, possessiveness is there with the bad relationships. Now, possessiveness can happen in any kind of relationship, but how is it like rooted in law? Then that's like marriage between a man and a woman a lot of the time. There used to be a helpline for LGBT people experiencing domestic violence called Broken Rainbow. That service exists in another form now, but it needed to exist for a long time because, you know, queer relationships can be just as fucked up. And I've been in, you know, queer community, and I've experienced like involuntary polyamory where anyone that I wanted to date was already in an open thing. I was like, okay, well, sure, I guess, like, don't have much choice. But did it work for me? No. Did like everyone who's like doing it, like, are they completely mentally sorted? Like, no. So there are people that do it incredibly well, and like, you know, I've seen it. We probably know the same people.
It's probably the same person because that's how we roll. But but they do it amazingly, and I wish I had that in me. But I am not mentally sound or have enough time or love for
it depends
multiple
on
people.
The time and the place and the people. You know, after 4 years of therapy, it might be all right for me.
I don't.
But,
I'm happy
like,
to say I don't.
If we look at, like, I forget how sometimes like how bad heterosexual relationships can be for some people. Then we can see the problems within our own communities, but like, do I think it's good that people have moved away from possessiveness to actually being able to acknowledge when they fancy other people, or that, you know, like, sex with someone else doesn't mean that you have to, you know, divorce, sell the house, you know, decide who gets custody of the cats. Like, you can work it out, like, just a one-off incident doesn't have to mean anything bad, or like, you know, love for more than one person doesn't have to be bad. And I think that those are conversations that are more readily being had in queer spaces, but that doesn't mean that all open setups or all polyamorous setups like work in all situations or work for everyone in that one relationship even.
I'm acutely aware we've been talking a while and I'm conscious of time. Is there any burning questions before we round off that somebody really wanted to ask? Some of the panellists probably be hanging around a bit afterwards if you wanted to ask something. Yeah? Did you?
I have a very vague question about pornography. In light of...
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, James, and my pronouns are he, him.
Lovely.
It's a really vague question, but like, obviously, with all the things that we've discussed today.
So is this the under 18s one?
Yeah.
Because there was like a face sitting and peeing and squirting one.
That was 2017.
And then they rolled that back, didn't they? Because there was an outcry, or is that still in
No,
place?
I think it's still in place in the UK. I think.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
read something about you have to like basically go to the newsagent and buy like
A porn pass.
Wow, can you imagine that?
So you have your name recorded. Yeah.
So they can do that, but they can't give us ID cards. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's the
Like-
overriding feeling, hilarity.
Get like register yourself as wanting to access adult content.
My local newsagent is not ready to see me with that type of pass.
Like that's what their plan is.
So did anyone have any like
He hasn't finished his question.
Elaborates, like,
Go on.
so there's this tension.
Or focus slightly.
Sorry, there's
Hey!
a
He's my
tension
friend.
between whether or not pornography, because obviously the reason it's being banned is to stop young people from accessing pornography, because it's ruining them or something. I don't know what it's doing to them. And then there's this tension between where young people are getting information. And if you're a young queer person, where are you going to, you know, we've just discussed how difficult it is to get access to information.
So on that point, we did actually have a sexual pleasure and wellbeing panel and we did discuss this actually in more detail because the panelists there were a bit more knowledgeable about porn specifically because it related to their area of
openly
work.
knowledgeable about porn specifically.
Yeah,
This one.
actually, so you might want to go back and watch that as well. Did anybody have any specific things that they wanted to say about?
It's tricky because to some extent, like as a queer person of colour, porn was something that was beneficial for me as a teenager long before I could come out, where I didn't have that sex and relationship education. But then I feel like if we're going to get rid of porn, then we need to up the SRE. That's the only way it can
Word. I mean, if we're
And
going
we're
to get
not-
rid of porn, we need to get rid of Trump. We need to get rid of, do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm really tired of this government telling us, you know, we care about the kids, they need to stop watching porn. There's
But they're
so
not-
many other...
You can't as
Well,
well. Like
yeah.
they're gonna keep accessing it. It just will be harder. They will get someone to
Think-
get a porn card for them. Also, like they'll make their own. Like that is
That is
a
another
big
really
problem.
big issue,
And they'll
actually.
copy things that they've seen. Like the younger that they are, they don't have the mental capacity necessarily to process like watching very violent, misogynistic porn, which is not all porn. You know, I think that. From the days of like cave paintings, there were like boobs and dicks on the cave paintings. Like we have to acknowledge that people keep, you know, making sexual content. that's
TV.
visual. Yeah, yeah. But like, yeah, without any good education, then people keep doing things, and like I think it's really dangerous that
Really
you know,
dangerous.
you're banning that kind of porn. People still have smartphones. There's a norm of like sending pictures to people now. So you've got lots of people that are becoming sexual offenders before they've turned 18 because they're making child pornography and have no idea that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And then their
Yeah.
parents aren't talking to them.
Yep.
They might be at a school where they're told, you know, we don't talk about such things. You know, we won't even tell you that masturbation is all right. You know, that's what we're working with at the moment.
Yeah.
And you've raised some really important points. I'm aware it's getting very hot in the room, and also we've been talking for ages. So does anybody have any last succinct points that they want everyone to go home with, or last thoughts that they really wanted to get off their chest before they go home to their beds,
Thrones.
their places of safety?
Game of
now?
Thrones.
No.
That's what I need to go home for.
Okay, so we need to get you home for GOT.
On anything, not just on porn. Like,
Or on anything, so just
Okay.
to round off.
mine is going to be on porn.
Okay, you
Go
can
for it.
be on board.
I feel like I don't know how I feel about the porn ban. I'm also not mad at the idea that lots of young people might grow up without the horrific stereotypes of what it means to be a man of colour, specifically a black man in porn, because it's absurd. Like, I mean, try it if you want before the ban. Look up the comments. Like, it's heartbreakingly disgusting.
There's a huge racial stereotyping across the board.
And where I've seen it impact young people is young people talk about their self-esteem really being damaged by a failure to look like a certain type of man.
Yeah.
And that's influenced by a lot of stuff, but specifically with the overlap of when they're engaging in sexual relationships, a lot of that's going to come from porn. So like, I don't know how I feel about the ban, but I'm also like, okay that like they get to a stage in their life where they've developed enough like selfness that maybe there's some like stuff happening there. That's what I'm gonna say. Yeah.
But it's not
So-
just porn. We've got advertising,
We
TV.
do.
It's everything. I just
Yeah.
feel like I just feel like porn is just this big. You know.
It's like female ejaculation is covered in the ban, not like racial stereotyping, so it's not that ban specific.
Just even James Bond, like the fact when people are like, can we have a black James Bond? Hell
Not on
no,
it.
no we can't. Blah, 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 blah. Like, it's all,
James Bond.
sorry,
No.
I'm just like,
I'm going to finish up
Okay.
and thank you guys all for being part of this.